was so glaringly obvious that it was impossible to now not see that there was a common thread in the demise and the slow trajectory of
Yeah.
kind of where I'd been to where I'd slowly gotten myself, and ultimately that was because of alcohol.
What do you think that this period of time where you'd went from Sir Bobby saying all these wonderful things and you were ready, and now all of a sudden your face didn't fit? What do you think that brought? What do you think that brought to the surface for you that was perhaps unhidden underneath?
It began to surface things that I had not resolved in my unaddressed emotional issues, essentially.
Hi there, welcome back to Street Level Stories. Today we have Phil Cave. I'm not going to give anything away as to who Phil is. We'll establish that as we go through. So, hi Phil, you all right?
Yes, very well, Marcus. Thank you very much for having me on. Very excited to be here.
Honestly, thank you so much for coming on. I always thank guests for coming on because it really is just people giving up their time to have a conversation, and it doesn't happen without you. So, thank you so much. One way I like to start every podcast is I always like to ask the who is question. So it's like, who is Phil Cave? But given that you've been on quite a journey, I think I'd like to start a little bit earlier and just say, who was Phil Cave before recovery, faith, those kind of things? Who were you? Who were you back in the day?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. And if I was to be completely and utterly honest, I was quite a reserved child and just someone who loved sport. Anything that had a round circular ball, round wheels, vehicles, loved cars, but predominantly, yeah, anything to do with sport. I was engrossed from a very young age.
No, that's great. Was it mainly football that really took your fancy, or was it, like you say, any sport you could get your hands on?
Any sport, yeah. I mean, football obviously became the dominant one, but tennis was one that I was really keen on. Pool, snooker, it really didn't matter. I just loved being in an environment where I was competing and improving and playing with other people to see where my skills were at.
Yeah. I would say if I'm thinking back to my childhood, I was more, you would have mistaken me for the ball more than the player kicking it. I was a relatively unfit child. I was around, I didn't like sports at all. And it was only really when I got to being a teenager that it really kicked in, that little competitive edge. My parents don't like football whatsoever. So it was not really part of my psyche to like football. It was just something I had to come, through talking to your mates and spend time. They're all like, "Oh, do you want to go down the field and kick the ball around?" And I was just, "Oh, I suppose so." And then I kind of fell in love with it from there. My first game I went to actually was actually it was a game in Germany. I went on an exchange trip with school and went and watched Stuttgart versus Frankfurt.
Okay.
Just because the kid I was on an exchange with was football mad, and naturally, as they assume from English people, that we're all football mad. So they bought us tickets, and honestly, I was hooked from there. I was hooked from there. It was a fantastic experience, but I now don't understand how I went so long in my life without football, if that makes sense. Um, so I know you were obviously part of Newcastle United's academy when you were younger. So football was pretty much your world, to be fair. So how much of you was wrapped up in this world? So how much of Phil was football?
Um, yeah, pretty much everything. Football takes over your life, especially once you reach the status at Newcastle. They want you training quite a number of days a week, and when you're not there, I was playing for my school team, and then other teams or whoever you were playing until the point where they said, right, you no longer can do those things. So yeah, it was you live and breathe it. Whether that's a good thing or not, I would say school didn't always get my priority or my interest. So it was one of those where it was just you're all in. You know, it's something that you are. That's what you believe you are destined to become or to do. So yeah, there was no half measures when it came to sport for me.
Yeah, and I think that's fair, to be honest, because it's well documented the amount of people that actually make it as a professional football. I think it's like less than 1% um, of people in academies, and you have to be all in. You can't be 1 foot in the door, 1 foot out. So I think that's totally fair to say that you have to kind of buy into that atmosphere. Do you think that being that totally involved in something where it was all your focus was, do you think it was healthy and natural? Because it kind of seems to be that's where people have to be, like I say, with the mindset. But do you feel that that is a sensible way to be, or do you feel that that kind of impacted you having other experiences?
Um, at the time, no, I don't think it did. You know, if I look back and reflect now,
Mm.
um, if you don't have solid frameworks to work off, if you don't have um, tools to be able to handle things that are going to come along the way, setbacks, then it can be challenging, and that's what ultimately did happen, which we'll obviously touch on as we go along. But in the early stages, no, I feel like it wasn't an unhealthy obsession. It was just something that I loved doing, and I didn't see it other than just doing something I loved. You know, like anyone else had a profession. You wake up, you enjoy what you do, and you just do it because why wouldn't you when you're enjoying it?
Yeah. Um, I think when you get, was obviously this is your place to tell me that I'm wrong, because obviously it's just all surmising from conversations I've had with people over the years, is when you get to a certain age bracket and you're into, you're starting to push in the academy sides and you're under 23s or reserve sides or whatever it was back then, does there have to be is there a point in your brain where you look at the team, you look at the first team, and you look at yourself and think, right, I can really push on now? Was there a moment in Newcastle where you really believed, you were going to make that jump?
Yeah, I from the very start had a very upward trajectory in sport. Um, it was constantly progressing. You know, as soon as I arrived at Newcastle, they were constantly pushing me into the next level. So when I was under 14s, I'd be at the under 16s. And I never even got to under 16s, it was straight into 18s. And then when I got my youth apprentice scholarship, which is basically, you know, your first big window of saying, yes, we want you, I bypassed the academy and I went straight to the first team and reserve setup. So I was just always fast tracking. And yes, I would certainly say there was a period of time with Sir Bobby Robson as the manager where, yes, there was clear and obvious signs that I was very close to an opportunity. I was getting a lot of solid. The players were recognizing that there was a player that had some talent, and I was getting decent feedback from the players. Um, so yeah, there was definitely a moment where I was at a point where it felt tangible that I was going to be playing for Newcastle United first team at some point.
I mean, I suppose it must be as well the fact that, we all know from being up here, and football fans all around the world know how much of a legend Bobby was. To want to work for a manager of that caliber, that must have driven you on even more, really, because he was phenomenal, wasn't he?
It was surreal, you know, you're a young 14, 15-year-old and you've got Sir Bobby Robson, you know, telling you that you've got a real opportunity at playing for his football team. You know, you're walking around, you're in the dressing room, football pitch, training pitches with Alan Shearer and all of these incredible footballers. You know, you do generally look around thinking, what is going on. It's something that you can't really explain unless you're in that situation.
Yeah. So you've said that you were starting to get to the point where the first team was looking increasingly likely, because obviously you had the word of Bobby. And at what point then did it change? Was it an injury? Was it just it didn't quite work out? Like what to go from where you're in the conversation for making that jump in the first team to then not being kept on? What well, one, what does that feel like? It sounds like a bit of an obvious question, but two, how did that kind of come about?
Yeah, it's something that I've reflected on over the years and tried to understand it myself. And um, I dare say there was a part of me that had already got slightly distracted. Um, I was doing things that, looking back as an aspiring athlete, I should have made decisions that were better for uh, myself and not trying to fit in with my friends. So, I would meet my friends on a Friday night and I would partake in um, doing what regular lads would do on a Friday night, which was having a little bit of alcohol. Um, so I certainly know, looking back, that was not something I should have been doing. But the biggest factor was Bobby Robson got sacked
Mm.
and a new regime came in, and my face didn't quite fit into that system. I was then demoted down to the academy after being bypassed that part, and that was, to me, something I struggled to deal with. And that's what I suppose I was trying to say a little bit earlier, is I didn't quite have the tools in my toolkit to deal with that level of what I felt at the time was rejection. And instead of doubling down, just working harder, maybe he's waiting for my next chance or a new manager again to come in, I feel like my attention wandered and didn't. I tried to just suppress the rejection that I felt instead of trying to deal with it in a healthy way.
Yeah, and I think there's a huge thing people don't necessarily realize. One thing I always found when I was growing up here is for young people as well, there's not necessarily, and it's still prevalent to this day, to be fair, there's not a lot for them to do. So alcohol tends to take quite a huge part up here to drink. It's a relatively alcohol culture up in the northeast, and I sometimes think that does travel down to the young. And if that's what your friends are doing, why wouldn't you do that? You're an impressionable young man. That's kind of how things go. So when you were dealing with this rejection and things, what do you think that this period of time where you'd went from Sir Bobby saying all these wonderful things and you were ready, and now all of a sudden your face didn't fit? What do you think that brought? What do you think that brought to the surface for you that was perhaps unhidden underneath?
Um, it began to surface things that I had not resolved in my youth. So unaddressed emotional issues, essentially, I think is what happened. And because I didn't have, again, the tools, and maybe I didn't have this person. My mother was always that person that I would confide in, and because I was doing things that she didn't necessarily want me to do, which, looking back, was exactly what her mother was. She sees her young child aspiring to be an athlete, and all of a sudden making decisions that are counteracting that. But instead of taking that advice, I suppose I pushed her away, and I lost that person who I could confide in. And at that point, I bottled it up and pushed it down. And I suppose alcohol started to become an escape or a release from those thoughts and feelings that I'd all of a sudden had come up to the surface, and I just didn't know how to deal with them in a healthy way.
Yeah. Well, I suppose looking back as well, if you're feeling a little bit, obviously, always feel to correct me if I'm wrong with this. This is just surmising from information. If you've been rejected and it's felt, and you know you're really struggling with that rejection from Newcastle, then you also feel like you don't have the trust or the confinement that you would have originally in your mother. That must have that must have contributed to feeling quite lonely, really.
Yes, I would say in a certain way it does, because you've got these things that are bottled up, and the only person that I suppose I felt safe enough to share it with was the one person that I've now kind of distanced myself from. Um, and yeah, it does. It starts to manifest in certain ways where, when you've got things that have happened that, you just can't quite figure out in your own head. Um, you struggle to cope, and you start to distance yourself from the people that you really should be, I suppose, leaning on.
I mean, you've talked about obviously decision making being affected at that kind of time, your focus being affected. In the naivety of youth, should we call it, do you think it was easier, should I say, to point the blame at someone else, perhaps rather than looking at yourself? Do you think that was probably a little bit easier for you to do than face the reality of maybe address what's going on under the surface or what you're truly feeling? Was it easier to perhaps blame others?
Yeah, absolutely. That is the exact thing that I think that we all do, um, when we don't want to face certain things. We're afraid of confronting these things, and instead of hitting it head on, it's much easier to find other things or situations to I suppose justify behaviours. So yeah, I would say you've hit the nail right on the head there.
I think that even goes, I was saying naivety of youth, I think that's prevalent with everyone, really, to be honest. Some people really don't like when a mirror's held up. I know I've struggled with it in the past. I'd like to think I don't necessarily struggle with it too much now. I'm quite an open person. I'm quite easy, not self-critical. It makes it sound like I bully myself all the time. I don't. I'm quite open to criticism because I think everyone can improve. I think everyone can get better. And I think you need to be open to that. But it has become much easier as an adult to do that. As a child, I was never the problem. It was always someone else. It was always someone else's problem that I got the bad luck. And so I think that's part of growing up, probably is a little bit of that. But I know plenty of people now who still play almost like the victim mentality of where they've done nothing wrong. And I think that's a really difficult thing to get over. So you mentioned, because there was a form that I got you to fill out a little bit before we did the interview, just for a bit of background, really. But you mentioned that you had some unaddressed trauma from earlier in your life that was affecting your choices. How did that show up without you fully realizing it at the time?
I think it showed up in the fact that I didn't feel worthy of having the things that were in front of me. I think I had a lot of shame and guilt, um, around the things that had happened, and when you've got it manifesting and circulating, it's hard to accept good things and the journey that I was on. Um, so yeah, I think it showed up in the fact that when I had such a um, when I got that setback, it just that I think it was almost like a trigger where like it almost like, um, confirmed what I was feeling. So yeah, I would say in terms of just not feeling as though I was worthy of that, journey, which also played a part in relationships as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think people need to understand that just how much even slight trauma, if it's unaddressed, can really, really impact someone. And it's such a shame that, it took such a hard hit on you. Was there a moment later on, like at what point do you think that it came where things started to make a little bit more sense? Like you started to put the links between, right, well, I'm doing this because of this, and this because I haven't addressed this. What kind of stage did you get to where you made that connection?
It wasn't until I got into recovery, and recovery was just such an eye-opening experience where I had to hit a certain point where I felt like there was no way out, and it was like it's either this way or bust. So I was able to find a community of people who um, had gone through the process, and they taught me how to essentially get honest with myself. And that's the key right there. Until you're ready to get honest, it's not, from my experience, it's very difficult to start to, as you mentioned, start to find your way out of that. And once I was able to get honest with myself, I was able to start reflecting and working through those in a structured way, which again, recovery helps you go through a process that you're going to identify something, understand what part you've played in it as well, because that's important. Instead of always going, this person, that person did this, it's no, what part did you play? What role have you played in this as well? And once you can start to do that, you can start to actually, it just, the weight begins to start to lift. And it no longer has that same kind of emotional baggage
Yeah.
that once had.
Do you think that so what was the point where because often when it comes to things like this, like recovery, often the first biggest step can be accepting the help or accepting you need the help. It's the acceptance. What point did that come? What was there? Was there a specific issue, or was there something that happened where you reached that moment where you were like, right, I need help now? Was there something specific, or was it just a general realization?
It was just a chain of events, it wasn't just, it didn't just happen overnight, and it's not something that I think naturally just happens in an instant. It's an accumulation of things, and everyone has their own moment where they hopefully wake up. Some of us don't ever get to that point. Thankfully, I'm someone who was able to get to that point without causing severe harm to myself. And it was just accumulation, as I mentioned. Sport was affected by it. A marriage was destroyed because of it. I couldn't hold a job down because I would forever be missing work or showing up late. Relationships were fractured. So, it wasn't just one thing, it was just accumulation of things that I could no longer, it was so glaringly obvious that it was impossible to now not see that there was a common thread in the demise and the slowed trajectory of, kind of where I'd been to where I'd slowly gotten myself, and ultimately that was because of alcohol.
Yeah. I think one thing, especially in this slightly more digital age, in the fact that everyone has almost a platform to talk these days, especially people from perhaps previous like footballers and things like that. And I don't know if you've recently heard the conversation that Janjo Shelby had. where he came out and he's basically said that when he was in Turkey, he was incredibly alone. There was nothing to do. It's quite a Muslim area, so there was only like 3 restaurants. So what he used to do was he used to come home from training at about 3 o'clock. And he said the two most dangerous things to footballers, well, one of the most dangerous things to footballers is alcohol, which, you might be able to attest to. And he said, now he couldn't drink because obviously that would infect him. So what he did do was he got heavily reliant on sleeping tablets.
Mm.
So he used to take a bunch of sleeping tablets when he got home from training. And then he used to wake up in the middle of the night and take a bunch more, which carried him through to the next month. And then he went back to training. And he did that for quite a few months. And it seems to be quite common that we're hearing these stories about footballers who have had these issues. And I think we'll probably hear more about footballers having the issues just because football is such a much larger sport and has a more global appeal to people than perhaps other sports like tennis and rugby. The platform for them isn't perhaps as big. But why do you think things like avoidance and unhealthy coping mechanisms are so common in high performance environments like football?
Yeah, that's a very good question. You're constantly on the edge every day. Your need to perform, and you're being scrutinized every day as well. Like everyone has an opinion, everyone's watching you. You're always one performance away from being sidelined, or the player behind you coming up and taking your position. So the pressures are immense. I don't know if people really see or understand that when they haven't been inside it themselves. So yeah, when you're constantly dealing with such high pressure, to try and find a release or an escape, I think is naturally something that tends to happen. Particularly, I think from previous generations. I think I was right at the end of the generation where it was a little bit more accepted to go out, what have you. So I think it's because of the pressures that you're under. You're naturally looking for something to give you that escape for a temporary moment.
Yeah, just to dull the noise almost of the constant pressure and the constant potential criticism, really. Um, so, what does that do you think the culture that's in football and that kind of pressure, it makes it really hard to talk about things of where perhaps you feel a little bit vulnerable or a little bit weak because you might face judgment from your colleagues, from your teammates, from fans, family, friends, the media, more so the media now than perhaps maybe back in the day because it's just so much in your face. And I think people perhaps not understanding that footballers are people as well, if that makes sense. Like just because they get paid in some cases an extravagant amount of money doesn't mean that they're okay, doesn't mean that they're not capable of feeling things in the same way that other people feel things. So do you think that probably plays a part?
Um, to a certain degree, yeah, I would say so. I think naturally, when you're a competitor, if you're competing against another team, you never want to show weakness. So again, from previous generations, I'd say people used to think probably it was considered a weakness, and it wasn't really something I suppose you would feel comfortable to say and share. In the event that it was seen as, you know, oh, I mean, you don't want to be seen as that person that looks like you're vulnerable, um, to give somebody else the upper hand, or what have you. Um, I suppose that would be something I would say is as a possible um, cause. I have spoken to a few people that are still in football, and I think it is starting to change. There is some level of due care for players, because like you say, I think it's like 0.01% of people make it. So the reality is there's going to be many, many more people like me who don't make it for whatever reason, who are going to need that outlet, because I think naturally sport becomes your identity and you know nothing outside of that. And when that's taken away, it's hard to know who you are away from sport. Almost cling to that, and it just naturally takes a while and a journey and a process to try and identify things outside of the sport as well.
Yeah, I think as well you've got I suppose you're saying that when you're in a competitive environment, you don't want anyone to see you as weak because they'll take advantage of it. But I suppose, especially for perhaps younger players who are coming up from academy, because so few make it, you need to have that elite mentality. And perhaps there's the stigma of being perhaps a little bit vulnerable, maybe needing a little bit of support. That might play into people's minds of impact and that, saying, oh, they're not mentally strong enough to handle it, they're not prepared. So do you think because of the pressure that's on them that it is just almost accepted that these kind of things need to be pushed down and forced away and hidden?
Quite possibly, yeah. From my perspective, looking from where I am now today, it's more about giving people the right frameworks to work off so that they can handle situations before they ever get to the point where they feel like they need to dull that pain. If you have a poor performance, your worth shouldn't be tied to that. You're so much more than a footballer or a tennis player. But I think we're naturally inclined to think and feel that way because we've not been given, I suppose, education on how to handle a bad game, a bad session, a bad review on social media, whatever it might be that triggers you to go into that place where ultimately you may feel like you want to self-medicate as opposed to dealing with it in a healthy way.
Yeah. I mean, obviously you've talked about your struggles with alcohol, and you've mentioned about in the pre-pod form about getting sober was kind of the moment that changed everything. What did you notice internally when alcohol was removed from your life? Like, what shifted? What, like, did stuff? Did colours seem brighter? Do you know what I mean? Was there more life in you as soon as it was removed?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it was it was a journey. It still is. I'm still working on myself to this day. But yeah, there was a sense of relief that came when I finally kind of waved the white flag and said, "This enough's enough," and being able to add structure to my life instead of chaos. That was something that was very different to me. The back of my boot used to just be the carnage in there, but because I just didn't have any tools. I was just, my whole mind was just filled with noise, and once that noise was able to start to slow down, uh, life became more calm, and recognizing that I am so much more than just that person that I was when I was playing sport, uh, and I was able to slowly, I suppose, become accountable again for
Yeah.
myself.
I think becoming accountable is really important. It's an important step, and I'm so pleased that, it goes without saying, but I'm so pleased that you got the help. And that you wave the white flag and you realize that, you know, you've hurt yourself, you've hurt others. It's time. It really is time to change and get back onto a level footing. And I just don't think people sometimes realize how debilitating an addiction can be. Even the smallest of addiction, how it can truly encompass everything that you do. I think there's probably more people that need to accept help and need recovery, and there's a lot of people don't have the tools to be able to do it themselves. They obviously need a structured program. What did you find that recovery introduced for you that football just couldn't provide?
Wholeness.
Mm.
I've become content in myself. I wasn't looking for external gratification anymore. I was able to be happy with the person I was without seeking accolades, receiving awards, getting any of those things that I think the world can sometimes push on us. If we're not chasing $1 million job, or, if we don't make it to the very heights of professional sport, whatever it might be, then you're a failure, but recovery helps you to become a human without the need to please other people.
That's really good. I think becoming it's really put it really nicely, just becoming a human again and wholeness, and just becoming what we're all meant to be without something just pulling we down and holding we back. And I think that's really nice. And it's really an eye-opening way to look at it. You've also mentioned faith as well as played a part. What role did faith play in rebuilding your sense of self and direction?
Again, very good question.
Sorry.
I'd known about faith from a child. I was raised in a Christian home, but obviously my decisions kind of led me down a different path for a while. So I always had an understanding of the frameworks. But for me, recovery teaches you like very simple steps. Follow this. So, it simplifies things which someone who's in a bit of a mess finds a lot easier to deal with. Faith to me adds an additional layer to the meaning of life. And from my own personal journey, it's the only thing that makes sense to me, that, this time that we're here, there is more to it than just being on this kind of journey. And it teaches you how to become selfless. Life is no longer about you, it's about how you show up to your neighbour, to your colleagues, and that feeling of forgiveness for things that you may have done and the harms that you may have caused, knowing that there's something out there that's saying, if you truly want to change, then you are free from those past harms. There's a sense of real peace that comes knowing that there's a forgiveness there and that you don't need to bear that burden anymore.
I mean, that forgiveness must have come as quite an overwhelming feeling after all the years of struggle and after all the things that you'd been through. To be able to forgive yourself must have been quite overwhelming.
Absolutely liberating. I cannot. There's not a word to explain the feeling that comes alongside it, and I've had the great pleasure of walking someone else through that journey, because once you've went through the journey yourself, it's about reaching your arm back to other people, and again watching that transformation from where they go from pain to freedom, it's an indescribable feeling that I would love many, many more people to experience. And I generally believe that the 12-step program, if every single person, whether you had an addiction or not, followed them, would be a far happier human being. It's such a simple, enjoyable process to follow that brings about such joy when you implement them in the right way.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's people don't realize. Well, helping others in general is something we should all strive to. I mean, I'm not particularly a man of faith myself. I'll be honest and say that's just not part of me. But I respect that people have it and it helps. And I think so long as it helps people, I don't really see the harm. So it's like I say, it's not something I practice, or it's not something I'm massively a believer in. But I absolutely respect that people find a purpose and that it helps people. So in my mind, it can't be a bad thing at all. We all believe in different things. You mentioned that that since going through the program yourself, you've been lucky enough to reach back, as you said, and help someone else go through this journey. What was the point when you realized that what you'd been through could actually become something that helps other people?
Yeah, again, it was a bit of a trial and error sort of thing. I did recognize quite early that there was a lot of satisfaction that came alongside trying to, I suppose, help other people find the freedom that I'd now found. And it was trying to make sense of, I was born with, some sort of sporting kind of talents. And for me to have squandered those talents, the only thing that I was able to draw a conclusion on was, well, if I had squandered such an opportunity in sport, then I have got an opportunity now to kind of redeem that story and now use that kind of past pain and leverage it for good, and now hopefully use that as an opportunity to redeem that sort of period of my life that unfortunately didn't pan out the way I was expecting it or hoping it to be.
So you're the founder of a company called Higgins Recovery Group. That's right, isn't it?
Yes.
What was the most important thing for you to get right from the beginning? So when you started that group, what was, this is what we need to do from the very start. This is the most important thing. What was that for you?
I mean, we're right at the very beginning of this journey. So I suppose I'm still at that stage of making sure that I do that thing that you're saying, that right thing. And it's, I suppose, holding the core values that I feel is necessary for the space that I'm going to enter. I think it's easy to just follow the money or follow situations that are going to benefit me the most commercially. And that's what I did for 2-3 years. I was in Germany for a number of years, and I felt that's where I got sober. Actually, that was my kind of rehabilitation center, as I would say. I just felt called to come back to the UK, where I felt I had a stronger case to serve people. And it wasn't until I tried a few things that just were not meant to be. This opportunity just kind of become more glaringly obvious that I needed to serve a space that I had some genuine connection with. So I think for me, it's trying to be as authentic as I possibly can, that people see that, I'm not just another person trying to make a commission. I'm someone who's been in the fire, and I want to now try and find solutions to stop this epidemic, because it's, I don't know if you've got any knowledge, but this, particularly the Northeast, this is the worst part of the country in terms of alcohol and drug-induced deaths. So there's something that's fundamentally going wrong, and I want to try and be a part of that solution.
No, that's really good, and I agree. I 100% agree. I think I mentioned earlier that this is, it's quite an alcohol-focused area. The Northeast, it's party central. I think it's easy to access alcohol as well from a young age. So it's hardly surprising that it then becomes an issue with adults. But you said you did your recovery in Germany mainly, and then you felt a calling back to the UK. Do you think at a certain stage, do you think it was perhaps you felt like you had unfinished business here due to the work you've done previously in your football, and obviously you didn't quite get that chance through probably a little bit of trauma, addiction, stealing that chance a little bit away from you? Do you feel that there was maybe in your brain you had a little bit of unfinished business here, and you wanted to come back and just, I'm not the Phil Cave that was just that got released from Newcastle and had issues with alcohol. I'm Phil Cave who's going to change people's lives and help people. And do you think there was maybe a little bit of where you had something left to do here?
Yeah, I think there was always one foot in and one foot out the door when I was in Germany. I sensed very early, I knew that was the right place to be, but the job itself was never going to be something that I could see myself doing forever, because the heart was not there. The love for the products that I was offering were never at the levels that I knew I needed them to be to want to sustain a career for the long term. So it very quickly became apparent that my time in Germany was all about recalibrating. Just to recalibrate, to build and develop my armory, and to become the Phil that was before the kind of period where unfortunately I made decisions that kind of deviated my path.
Yeah, no, that's really so. I agree. I think, to be honest as well, I think you've chose well, like you said, and when you said about the problems with the Northeast being one of the worst places or the worst place, is I think you've picked the perfect area, because sometimes I feel there's definitely issues over funding up here in the Northeast. High levels of multiple levels of deprivation. That it's countless how much it gets left behind, despite the fact that it's such a huge part of the country and it's so important, and it has such a history. And the fact that it does just get a little bit left behind. And I think if you're ever going to make an impact somewhere, this is the place that probably needs it the most. So I think you probably made the right decision in that. Now, obviously, you said you're at the very, very beginning of the Higgins recovery group journey, but you mentioned getting those values in at the start, putting you on the spot a little bit. What would you say what values have become non-negotiable to you? What do you just not? There's no way you compromise these values now.
Integrity. I'm just, I've become quite aware that there's going to be times where there's an opportunity to, place a candidate to make a quick dollar with a client, but I need to make sure I've got a set of principles that I adhere to ensure that I'm not just chasing the commission. I'm finding organisations that I truly believe are trying to make a difference. They're not just looking to onboard people and earn money from people coming through their door.
Yeah, for me as well, integrity is massive. Like I'll always make decisions in the best sense of other people rather than what makes best sense for myself. Sometimes to my own detriment. That's just how it goes. That's who I am. Um, and I think you have to have values. There's too many people who are so determined to make a quick buck, as the term, that they are willing to just compromise what they believe in. They are willing to compromise what's important. So I think as well, considering you're doing a recovery group and you're going to be working with people who perhaps maybe haven't had those values or have compromised those values to get what they've needed to where they've been, I think instilling them back into someone is probably not a bad thing, to be fair. And like I say, I think honestly, values are massive to me, and integrity really is one of them. How can people be expected to trust you if you don't stand by and do what you say you're going to do? Just makes you just as bad as the people who haven't helped them. So you mentioned that when it comes to success as well, one of the things you mentioned was that some people see success for people in your field that you came from was whether you were a Premier League star or something like that. And if you're not that, then you're not a success. And that's just couldn't be any further from the truth. How has your definition of success changed now compared to earlier in your life?
Yeah, it's something that I think does take time. You know, naturally when you're a little bit younger, you don't quite have the same outlook in life. You know, you haven't had the trials, the tribulations, the knocks. But yeah, from my perspective now, it's something that I'm trying to aspire to do. Is, you know, if something was to happen to me tomorrow, would I be at peace with myself that I feel like I'm trying to do something with my life that was of meaning and hopefully beneficial to to those around me.
Yeah, I think it has to be. You need to be able to close your eyes at the end of the day and know you've done the best you can. And it's being able to look yourself in the mirror and understand that you're not going to get every decision right, but you've made every decision you can with the best interests of that person at heart. And I agree, success, I've said this before on my last chat I had on the pod, is success is all relative. It really means different things to different people. Like, I have a beautiful wife, 2 kids, I've got a house, I've got a job that pays for the house. To me, that is a success. I am successful because I have those things. There's people who don't have those things who will also see themselves as a success, because it's all relative. It all depends on what you're looking for. So I think success does change on age as well. Yeah, success is just one of those ones that always makes us giggle a little bit when you speak to a kid and you go like, what do you want to do? I'm going to be a Premier League star. Wonderful. Have you got any other backup plan? No, I think I'm going to do it. I used to work in a school. I used to teach kids with special educational needs many moons ago. And there was one kid, he was fantastic footballer. He was just one of the kids in the class. I wasn't specifically working with him. And we were doing one of those conversations you have with children where it's, what do you want to do when you grow up? And he went, well, I'm going to be a footballer. And I went, right, okay. I was like, any other thoughts? He went, why would I need to think of anything else? I'm only ever going to be a footballer. And I was just like, right, okay. And I was trying to temper his expectations, and I was going, look, let's think logically. If he weren't going to be a footballer, I tried loads of different ways. Dead entirely. I'm going to be a footballer, so I don't know what you're talking about. And he was just so. And then it was as he was leaving the classroom, he went, I'm going to be a footballer, you know. And I was like, yeah, you said. And he went, I'm going to have a beautiful wife. And I was like, I'm going to have loads of money. And I was like, oh, yeah. And he went, I'm going to be the most famous English player ever. And I was like, all right, okay. And he went, did you, and I had a chat with him a little bit later on. And I went, I was like, you need to be aware that it's a very, very difficult thing that you're looking to do. Because we did try and base their expectation. You don't want to hype them up so much that it's unrealistic. And he said, "Oh, what have you done?" And I went, that's a fair point. I've not done anything. So your dreams are bigger than mine. But I tried to explain what success looks like, and I went, you might not hit Newcastle. It was all about Newcastle. He wanted to be Newcastle's number 9. And I was like, well, you might not be Newcastle's number 9. I went, but you might be, you might be Blythe's number 9. I was like, that'd be cool. I was like, Blythe Spartans. No, why would I want to do that? No, and he just couldn't wrap his head around it. So success just makes us giggle sometimes, because it really does mean different things to every single different person. So at the very beginning of the chat, I asked the question, who was Phil Cave? And you gave your answer of who you were beforehand. So compared to the version of yourself that was, your identity was completely rooted in football. You were football, you were the academy, you had trauma, you had alcohol. Who is Phil Cave now?
I am someone who has completely transformed my outlook and way of thinking in life. What I now consider a success is completely different to what I thought was a success when I was younger. I'm a man who simply wants to give back to my community, because I just feel as though we're in need of people to step up at this moment in time. This country, I think, is going through a bit of a turbulent time, and
It is.
it feels like everyone's leaving this country, and I think it's going to require a certain amount of people to actually stand up and try and take care of the people within it. And I feel like alcohol, substance, that sort of space is a space where I can hopefully serve. So I suppose if I was to summarise, who am I now? I'm a man seeking to serve my community.
That's great. Do you know what? It is a really difficult question to ask someone. Yours is a little bit different because there's a whole journey involved, but I've asked that at the beginning before, and you see their eyes start to panic, where it's just like, how do you describe yourself? Because we often never get an opportunity to explain who we are, and no one ever truly asks how we see ourselves. And having that self-reflection to have a look at ourselves can be terrifying. I think as so long as you can sit there and you go, I'm a person, I'm worthy of love, I've got passion in my life for something, I'm trying to make a change, or I stand up for what I believe in. As long as you can say something along these lines, I think that gives a true sense as to who someone truly is. But I appreciate that question does put you on the spot a little bit. It catches everyone out. So what do you think in your whole journey what do you think the journey's taught you about responsibility that you didn't understand before?
I really had no responsibility when I was growing up. Yeah, taking ownership for your life is huge. Not taking things for granted is another thing that I feel like we can do. especially when you come from a nation like ours that's kind of been living in a quite a comfortable period of time. It can make you complacent and you don't realize what it means to work hard sometimes, and taking responsibility. Um, like, I have a wife and children, and that is the most beautiful responsibility that, in my opinion, you could ever have. Getting up and doing things that is going to improve and help them is what I strive for. So yeah, taking responsibility for everything you do is huge. I think it's something that's lacking
Yeah.
in some ways, because sometimes we may not have been taught those things. That's what I learned on my journey. I got around real men that did not pander to me. They told me straight whenever I was not towing the line. They made me see what it meant to actually show up and what a real man looks like, which is taking care of their family, their community, and providing.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I would say when I had we had our oldest when I was, what would I have been, 21. And I wasn't horrible. I was just quite a selfish person. Um, Not necessarily selfish about me, more like me and my wife. Well, not my wife at the time, but me and my wife would just want to go out and do stuff. It would be what we wanted to do. No responsibilities really. We'd live with our parents. Used to go to work, get a bit of money, and then just go out and spend it. There was no level of responsibility. And I remember when she first told us that she was pregnant with our oldest, I sat there and I thought, and I was quite lucky that I got my self realization when I was quite young.
Mm.
I literally sat and looked at myself in the mirror, and I sat there and said, "What on God's green earth are you going to do with a kid? You are not ready. You are an absolute mess, and you need to sort yourself out." Like, I was so critical of myself, and I went out that day. Well, it was the day after, because I found out in the evening. I went out that next day, and I went, I don't have enough money, and I don't want us living separate with a child. I want us to live together. So I went out and I found a part-time job on top of what I was already doing. I was working in a suit shop in town, and I used to work evenings after work because I used to work in the school. So it was 7:30 till 4 at the school, and I used to fly into town, and I used to work in town in the shop until it closed at like 8, half 8. Then I used to work weekends. I used to work the whole shifts of weekends, all of a Saturday, all of a Sunday. And then when it was half term during the schools, when we would be off, I would work the full week during then. So I did that for about 3.5, 4 months of working pretty much, well, every single day, with the exception of Christmas. Other than that, I literally worked. If there was a shift going, I took it. And it nearly broke us, to be honest. But it taught us like what real graft is, and what level of effort you need to put in to be responsible. Because I felt like we wouldn't have survived without that money. We simply wouldn't have. It paid for the first rental period on the flat. It allowed us to buy baby furniture. It allowed us to put food on the table a little bit, for the fact that, we had a baby now, and babies are expensive. But it was that moment of realization when I looked at myself and I went, you are not responsible for yourself anymore. Because ultimately, even when we didn't have children, if we'd broken up, yeah, it would have been sad, but I wasn't responsible for anything else. Now I had a responsibility and a real purpose. So my children are my purpose, to make sure they have the best life they can have, to make sure they grow up to be strong, confident humans in what is proven to be quite a difficult world for them to grow up in. as kids now. So I totally understand what you mean about responsibility. Everyone gets that moment and it just finally wakes up, and then it's quite eye-opening. And it taught me to be quite when I say grafter, I don't work with my hands. I'm not a physical labourer. No one would want me on a building site.
Neither me, for sure.
But, when it comes to what work do you need to do, no problem. If I need to stay up late, no problem. Whatever's needed to be done, I can do it. And I will do it because I've done it. I've been there. I've served my time almost in showing that I can show up. I can do this. I am responsible. And especially if we're adding addiction in there, substance, alcohol, then responsibility is even more important, because that lack of responsibility is, you'll know yourself, it's just snowballs. It snowballs and it damages relationships because people are looking to point fingers where they don't want to accept that they're to blame. So I think what you said was absolutely brilliant on that. So I've got one final question just to round it off. If there's anyone listening to this who is, maybe they're in that in-between phase, and it doesn't even need to be football, it could just be anything. If someone's in that in-between phase where something's ended, they're struggling, maybe they don't trust themselves yet, what would you want them to hear?
Seeking help isn't a weakness. It is actually a strength. And what they're thinking in their head is more than likely completely different to what the reality is. Because our brains will constantly try and tell us things and make things up. And when we don't have a sounding board or, a proper process to follow to try and help us in that transition, then things can snowball very quickly. So for me, it's recognizing that seeking help is not weak.
Yeah, no, that's great. I completely agree. I think it's making sure people understand that they're not alone. And chances are, what they're thinking, other people are thinking as well. And it's accepting that help, like you say, and showing that you're not weak. If you put your hand up and just go, I just need a hand, I need a bit of help here, that is not a sign of weakness. It's if anything, it's a sign of strength, to show that you can be strong enough to look for that help. But that advice was, it was really good. And come to the end of the podcast now, but it's been a really eye-opening conversation for me. I've really enjoyed it, and hopefully people who are listening will as well. Hopefully you've enjoyed it, and I haven't put you too much on edge with some of the questions, but I just want to say I'm so pleased that you've found forgiveness in yourself. I'm so pleased that you've gotten to a point in your life that you feel proud of, and just a massive thank you for coming on.
Yeah, no, it's a real pleasure. Like you say, these are the sorts of things that naturally I'm really drawn to try and get involved with, because hopefully, like you say, I'm hopefully here to try and serve people. And if one person out there hears something that resonates or allows them to feel like, there is hope beyond their current circumstances, then that's what I'm hopefully trying to achieve. And thank you for your platform. It's a real pleasure to have had the opportunity to be a part of your journey as well.
No, thank you. I really appreciate that. Well, it's been great to have you on. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll speak to you soon, Phil. Thank you so much.
Nice one. Thanks, mate.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.